and welcome back to another episode of the Northern Roses podcast. With me, Henry North, a freelance journalist from Manchester, and Dr. Adam North.
Hi everyone.
This week, we're going to talk a bit about what we've been up to and a bit more about the overarching themes of what the Northern Roses articles have recently been about. Also, I'd like to make a big thank you to everyone who's been listening to our most recent podcast with Dr. John Mulligan, and thank you for all of the positive feedback. And if you're listening to this and haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend it. So, Adam's had a busy week. He's been in Cologne in Germany on an academic conference. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this week I went to talk in Cologne about, it was a sports and discrimination conference, and I was talking about sports organisations, elite sports, and how something that we may consider to be a good workplace, how actually, when we look at the evidence available, a very high proportion of elite athletes suffer from mental disorders. And my talk was investigating and discussing some of those findings and what I think the broader problem with professional sports is, which I think plays into a broader theme that we've kind of been discussing throughout the arc of the Northern Roses' recent articles and discussions, which is our relationship with work and working environments, and really to ask who is happy with their working environment. And I would suggest that there aren't that many people who are. And in that situation, if many people are unhappy in their working environments, why is that the case? And why do we accept it's the case? Are there things we can do to change them and make them better?
So just to strip that back a little bit, when you're talking about things like working environment, what do you mean? What constitutes a working environment?
Well, a working environment, you can take an individual workplace. So an individual workplace might be the people who you work with, your boss, the office space, do you work from home? All of these factors that just play into your solo individual experience of work. But I think we're more interested in structural working environments. So, for instance, what might be common themes that we all experience in the workplace? And one of those themes may be the power structures. So most of the times we all work underneath someone, and that person may delegate work to us. They may decide whether we get a promotion, a pay rise. These are very kind of standard models of work that operate throughout industries. And the shared features are those that are what we really look to change. Individual workplaces may have different ways of doing things, but ultimately it's those broader themes that are shared among industries. So for instance, most people will work 5 days a week, 9 to 5. That is a structural way of organising labour and work. Whereas let's say if you can start early and finish early, that might be an individual workplace decision to change something. But we're looking at those broader themes of work.
You mentioned a little bit there about how athletes develop mental health problems from their workplace environment. Would you like to really talk about what kind of conditions people may develop, or athletes in particular? Because, a lot of people sit there and they go, athletes are on all this money, like footballers in particular, 150 grand a week. What have they possibly got to complain about?
Yeah, well, let's start first of all with what a mental disorder might look like, and then we can change the discussion on why people may underestimate the number of mental disorders elite athletes have, or may think that they are less likely to suffer them than the general population. So the World Health Organization currently estimates that about 1 in 8 people live with a mental disorder, which is characterized by a clinically significant disturbance to an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior. So it's usually associated with kind of distress or impairment in important areas of your normal function. And that normal is typically defined by you, how you feel when you say, I feel normal. So it can be certain things like anxiety disorders, so panic attacks, OCD, mood disorders, depression, bipolar. These are forms of mental disorder, but there's also things like disruptive behavior, eating disorder, personality disorders, PTSD, schizophrenia, substance abuse or substance use. These are all parts of what constitutes a mental disorder. And within that, athletes will be more prone to some than others, specifically when we think about the pressures they might face. So things like substance abuse. Athletes are often systemically prone to substance abuse, performance enhancing substances, because the pressure to win based on what that impact that might have on your career, your potential earnings, your popularity, all of those factors may play into the desire or the pressure to take performance enhancing drugs. So that's kind of looking at mental disorders, what mental disorders are. Maybe we'll get into a bit later on why these mental disorders are more common among elite athletes than the general population. But one reason why they're under-researched or under-considered is because elite athletes, again, a small proportion of elite athletes are incredibly well rewarded for their work. So you hear about footballers all the time on £400,000 a week, unbelievable money. So people think, well, if you're on that much money a week, you can't really complain about your mental health, or you shouldn't really complain about your working conditions. And also, I think not only the earning potential, but it's also this idea that you must enjoy your job. People are like watching football or whatever sports because presumably they enjoyed playing those sports as children or still enjoy playing those sports. But the experience of recreational leisure sports compared to elite sports is a much different it's a much different kettle of fish. If I'm playing sports as a child, the pressure is just it's in a completely different league. And
I suppose that one example what I think of there about the pressure is the pressure that you have on your body too. So for example, if you get injured, you've got a lot of mental stress to then get back to the team, because essentially you lose your place, don't you, when you're injured?
Yeah.
And there's always going to be someone else there chomping at the bit to get in there and take your place. So while you're sat there and your body's letting you down, essentially, it's like a kind of feeling of insecurity, really, that could creep in. And I can understand how you could develop problems from sitting on the sideline. Maybe if you get a broken leg, for example, you've got like the trauma of a broken leg to deal with.
Yeah, so I think that you're touching on one of the key problems, that in elite sports, problems that exist in maybe not traditional, but in other workplaces and other industries is exacerbated. So like you said, if you get injured in elite sports, your career is limited at that point. And that is the same as any industry. In most cases, if you get a significant injury or something happens to you, your career may be slowed down, your career progression. The difference is for elite sports people, their careers are typically 10 years at the top, maybe even less than that, depending on the sport. Obviously, there's some differences like golf or other sports where people can continue at the top for a significant period of time. But the short length of a career means that athletes often have to, they often are looking at it thinking, if I miss, say, one season and then a club don't give me a new contract, my earning potential is severely limited by that. And so you're in a situation where an injury is it's basically such an impactful point that the pressure to then ensure you stay fit in the face of oftentimes incredibly strenuous schedules is crushing. Like I think anyone can have sympathy for the idea that if you have to continue to perform at your best, say once every 3 days, and you know that if you get injured or let's say you have a bad game, that you may then lose your position, you may then lose your earning potential, that is a precarious situation to situate yourself within.
And it's more than that as well, though, isn't it? People have to now live with the whole social media element of being a professional athlete, and you're seeing it now, and they keep trying. I think recently this week in the news there was something about Keir Starmer having to work with social media companies to try and combat social media abuse. But one, and I think, to be honest, especially with footballing, example of the Club World Cup now, people are coming around to how much, or players being overplayed. And I think a lot of people who would go, well, they're earning so much money, it's fine. Even I think most fair people are thinking it's too much now. Because for me, one example is Phil Foden. So Phil Foden comes off the back of a treble winning season, then wins the title the next year, PFA Player of the Year, plays in the Euros, so doesn't get much rest. And throughout it all, he's got the pressure of a title race, treble, title race, Euros, playing for England in the final, comes back, doesn't have much of a rest, plays the season again. Rodri, having had the same workload, does his ACL. Foden then has to deal with like the mental pressure of all of that. And even this season now, he has to play in the Club World Cup. And he wouldn't have had a break had he not said to Tuchel, like, I don't want to play for England.
Yeah, and this takes us to a number of issues, but I think one of them is to take Rodri, because Rodri said the week before, I think it was, before he did his ACL, before he got injured, he said the players may be forced to go on strike if the schedule continues the way it is, and because it's too much.
For those that don't know, Rodri is the current holder of the Ballon d'Or, which is
the most prestigious footballing award for basically the best men's. He won the best men's individual player award. So clearly an incredibly talented footballer. And for him to come out and say, the players might go on strike, you'd think that people would take that seriously. So in any other workplace, let's say the best, as recognised by their peers, the best worker comes out and says the working environment is unsustainable, they might be taken seriously. But in football, what happens is the media, parts of the media, not all the media, parts of the media come out and they criticise the footballers, saying, you're earning this ridiculous money, you can't be complaining about the situation that you're in. But ultimately, it comes down to these players are paid what the market sees as their fair salary. They are paid. They're not overpaid, because the owners of these football clubs they're not charities. They're not giving players more money than they think that they're worth. They're giving them what the market has decided that these players are worth. So really it is the owners who are, in any workplace, extracting profit, and these players are simply workers who are earning what is the fair share for their work.
So just to put it into perspective, Rodri comes out on the 17th of September 2024 and says that the players are close to going on strike in a protest at increased games. 10 days later, 27th of September 2024, Manchester City midfielder Rodri will miss the rest of the season after rupturing his anterior cruciate ligament.
Yeah.
10 days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
so he must have been at breaking point for some time.
It makes you think he must have realised the amount he was playing, he wasn't in his peak physical fitness.
Yeah.
Because how could you be? If you're playing, some of these players are running 13 kilometres every match. They're playing every 3 days. How many elite athletes can do that? Where it's, impact as well, high impact, sprints. I don't think that sports could remain enjoyable for you at that point if you were under that kind of stress, physical stress and mental pressure. And this is shown in the research, the evidence I've looked at, where there are a number of articles that suggest that around a third of elite athletes will suffer or be suffering with a mental disorder. A third. And this is compared to that statistic earlier of around 1 in 8 for the general population. So it's a much higher percentage of people suffering mental disorders in these environments. And I think that like we've said, there is a certain idea about elite athletes that prevents them from receiving the attention that maybe other areas would. But I also think that there's a mental health stigma in sports where elite athletes are supposed to be seen as mentally tough and able to endure hardships. And so if you are to speak out about your mental health, you are perceived as not elite enough, or not, you're going against how people perceive that you should be as an elite athlete. And we saw this with US Olympic gymnast Simone Biles, when she has numerous times brought up her mental health challenges in elite sports. And you will always see criticism suggesting that, isn't she supposed to be mentally tough? She shouldn't be competing for the US if she's not mentally tough enough. And I think I would actually say it's quite disgusting, to be honest.
I think cricket's quite a good example as well, because we've seen Ben Stokes recently come out and talk about his mental health struggles to do with the passing of his father and like the demands on him. It was quite a good cricketing documentary, The Edge, where the way that I interpreted it was the whole team were kind of struggling with their mental health at the time, and no one was talking about it, and they were all just silently suffering away. It's really quite sad to think about that. And from the outside, people might go, "Oh, you're living the dream, playing for England, touring the world, or you're a gymnast for the US, or you're playing football for a Premier League team." It's like what every child dreams about. But you dive that little bit further in, and it can be quite sad.
Yeah, and there's a number of documentaries where we see similar things, like the Ronnie O'Sullivan one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Can you remember the name of that?
Oh no. Oh.
And there's another one about the Olympics. I think it's maybe the price of gold or something like that, with Michael Phelps and various other Olympians who discuss these very issues. And they would say, in terms of the earning potential, especially if we think about, say, Olympic athletes, their earning potential, first of all, you have to win gold. If you win any other medal, you're not making money. You have to win gold. And then if you win gold, you've got 1 to 2 years to monetize that achievement. So really, your earning potential is incredibly short and narrow. And a lot of these federations people would say, oh, well, the federations are funded differently, so the pressure's not the same because they are state funded, so they're not driven by the same commercial pressures as other sports organisations. But it's not true, because as public funding has been cut for the past 20 years, many of these sports federations have had their funding cut as well. So they are now subject to the same commercial pressures, where they need their athletes to perform and win so that they can get sponsorships, because they are also dependent upon sponsorship money, so that they can continue to maintain and function as sports organisations. So we see that this precarity of work is so pervasive among elite sports that the appeal must be for, I think what happens is you get incredibly good child athletes who enjoy the sport, they have fun. There have been numerous studies done of child sports where they say the number one priority for children is that they have fun, not to win. As they get older, the priorities may shift, but as priorities shift to winning, children have less fun. And so you go from this initially very talented children athletes, they're doing it for fun. As it becomes more professionalized, winning is the priority at that point. And then it's commercial pressure, and you have coaches who demand far more of you, and they're non-democratic coaches most of the time as well, so that what they say goes. It's not open to discussion. And I think that all of these things come together to create a situation where many elite athletes didn't really sign up for the situation that they end up in. They were just incredibly talented and end up in a situation that is really just that I don't see any way how anyone could think it would be productive to someone's mental health.
So, to put you on the spot here, if I'm sitting on the tube and I'm listening to this, how does the atmosphere in professional or elite sporting environments relate to my workplace?
How
What
does it
can I
work?
take away from this?
Well, I think it's a microcosm. So elite sports is a microcosm of other industries, other workplaces. It's just more extreme. But really, in all workplaces, we suffer from these same kinds of power dynamics and certain kinds of pressurized environments to perform in certain ways. And really, one of the things that could shift, I think, the environment for athletes is athlete-owned sports leagues. Like, if the athletes owned the leagues, they would make decisions that were in their best interests. And okay, that may reduce slightly the competitiveness or the pressure, the number of games. That might be a cost, but is that cost worth it to improve the mental health of all the people who work there? And I think it's the same as if you think about your company. If the company were to make small changes to the maybe pressure on the employees and the productive cost, would it improve the mental health of the people that work there? And if let's say, to move it on even to an even more extreme example, if you and your fellow employees, not the managers or the ownership team, the teams that own shares in the company, but let's say the actual employees made decisions about the working environment, do you think that would make you happier? And if it made you happier, do you think it would make you more productive? I think these are key questions that we need to all ask about our working environments.
And that does bring us on to a recent Northern Roses article. The future of work is worker-owned, understanding syndicalism. I think for some people, it can be quite something to get your head around, can't it? Like this idea of a employee-owned business.
Which I think there are certain companies like the Co-op where this is an idea that isn't new. It's been done. And in fact, many of these companies that are worker-owned have much better outcomes for the employees because they make the decisions. Even companies like Waitrose and John Lewis, where employees are incentivized to own part of the company or make certain decisions, although it's not all fair, it's still better than other companies where there is no employee ownership or involvement. But syndicalism is basic where it diverts from ideas of, say, Marxist ideas of socialism or state-owned capital, and we won't get into that now. But where it differs is it effectively argues that if workers own all of the companies, they will make the best decisions that will improve the ability of these companies to work, to produce things, and it will improve their quality of life. Whereas currently, what happens is there are owners of all of the biggest companies in the UK are probably the super wealthy or foreign investors. And so what happens is decisions are made that basically increase the short-term profitability of these companies to improve the size of the dividend that they can give out to the owners. And that's not actually in the interest of the workers, and it's not in the interest of society. Because let's say, looking at water companies, if a water company thinks, what can we do here? We can reinvest in our infrastructure so that we can manage sewage properly, or we can do it on the cheap and pump it into the rivers so that we can pay our shareholders a bigger dividend. What are they going to do? Straightforward. Like, if you're making your decisions for your shareholders, you're going to pump that sewage into the rivers. But if your ownership team is the employees and the community who live in that area, are they going to pump sewage into their rivers? No, they're not. They'll reinvest it. They'll improve the infrastructure. And that's what it's about. It's about the people who work in the communities making the decisions for the community. Whereas currently, very few companies make decisions that are in the interest of people who live in that area, who work for the companies, and just for the broader, greater good. as we might understand it.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, within the UK, there's an overarching theme now, and the more people that I'm talking to, it can come back down to things like community. And now these community links that used to be strong are very, very weak. And it's kind of like we're in this contradiction a bit, that in terms of communication, it's never been easier, but we're actually worse at it now. And I don't know if that's because as technology comes in, it has a habit of making people lazy. I don't know if that's, this idea now that...
I don't think people are lazy, but I think they've been systematically disempowered. So what happens is, it starts at a political level. If you feel that your vote no longer matters, you feel disempowered at a national level. Then you say the company you work for no longer makes decisions that are in your interest. You feel disempowered at a local level. And then you look at your council, or even the local things they're making decisions, they're making cuts that affect you and your community to make those areas worse. You feel disempowered at all levels of your life. So how do you change that? You have to start off with local empowerment. Decisions made at a council level and local level that you feel can empower you, give you a voice, make change in your area. That's a beginning. If you feel that you can make change there, then your company might feel empowered to start a union. Let's say your union then makes decisions that are good for you. Suddenly you're empowered at a level above your local level. Suddenly it's a workplace empowerment. And then from there, maybe you can have national empowerment. And this is what happened in the post-war period, is that you had these workers' unions became interested in politics because they were empowered at a local and workplace level, and then they became empowered at a national level. And then from there is just a chance that if you're empowered at a national level, perhaps you could even be empowered at an international level. Perhaps you could even make change at an international level. And this is the dream that's died, I think, in the UK, is that people don't feel empowered at any level of their lives. They don't feel like they have a voice at any level in their life. And really, that's, for me, truly sad. And I think it can change, but it has to change. We have to shift the way we think about it. We can't think anymore that we're disempowered and we don't have a voice, because you have to start somewhere. So if it starts locally, great. Start locally and build. Because if we can start locally, we can build into those companies and build that empowerment and that voice, and then build into hopefully build it into our national conversation. Try and shift politics so that actually our politicians make decisions that are in our interests. And then it's a question of, can we then make international change? If our politicians now represent us, can they then represent us at an international level? Because these are all international problems. Like tax evasion is an international problem. It's not a national problem. And so when we think of certain political parties like Reform that promise simple answers to complex problems, they are they're not misunderstanding, but they just play on this idea that everything can be done on a national level. Like Brexit, for instance, is this idea that all of our problems can be solved if we leave our big trading bloc and on our international partnerships. But no, if you want to make real change in the world now, you have to be part of an international solution. Climate change cannot be solved by one country. It can only be solved by all countries. International redistribution of wealth cannot be solved by one country, but it can be solved by all countries. And this is the key thing now, is that we have to recognize that if we want power back, we have to work together. So the Margaret Thatcher's idea of society being dead and just a nation of individuals was the real purpose was to disempower us all. Whereas really, we are a nation of collectives and communities and shared cultural ideas of who we want to be and what we want to do. And it's time that we recognize that again, that we are a community, and only by being a community can we rebuild.
So yeah, some big picture ideas there.
Yeah.
And well, we're coming up to half an hour now. So to give the audience or the listener a little idea of what's to come? Do you have any plans?
Well, I'd like to suggest, since Manchester is a city of firsts, it's the first industrial city. It's the city that fought for equality. It introduced the Guardian to the world. It's a city of progressive or radical firsts. And I think, really maybe Manchester has an opportunity to start to rethink how people live within it. And I'd like to, I think I'm looking at writing an article maybe about how Manchester can start introducing maybe what changes could be made to really rethink how people live within a city. And are there ways to make city living far more fulfilling and I think more enjoyable for people? Because although I think in any city there are a range of amenities and things to do, and they're often good places to live. But I think with, say, cost of living and pressures on people and workplace problems, things like that, I really do think that not enough people, and this is a global problem as well, but are living particularly fulfilling or happy lives. And I think we really need to rethink how we can change that.
So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? I think that's one of the key. Just acknowledging people and talking to them, that gives them a sense of empowerment, and that's a place to begin. Although we all want to see changes made, change can only be made by first listening to each other and talking to each other. And I think civil assemblies have been suggested as kind of ways to do that, where for policy decisions, collectives of people from across the country are almost by like random lottery allocation, you're picked to go and talk about these issues. And I think there would give us we would get a vast range of thoughts and opinions and be able to form some kind of consensus. And consensus decision making is always the best decision making, because then you have to compromise. This is why, we've talked about it before, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again, but proportional representation is the best form of governance, because you have to have different groups with different ideas coming together and reaching some kind of consensus with compromise. Whereas currently we have too many politicians who are unprepared and unwilling to talk to one another and make decisions that are not just what they want, but are a mix of ideas.
Okay, well, on that note, we'll leave it there for this week.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you again for everyone who's listening and supporting the podcast. One thing that would really help this podcast and blog to grow would be that if you recommend it to your friends. I know I sound like a bit of a club rep when I say like these kind of things, but for me personally, I think that what we're trying to achieve from this blog is no one's really doing it, and we need more support really to grow. Thank you for listening, and we'll do this again soon.